And I am, of course, like not the most familiar with Teams. So I'm just trying to get it so that I can like see people.
I think there's just a handful of us that have our videos on right now. I see 4. Give you a benchmark.
Okay, thank you. I see 4 now as well. I see 3 in me, so that's fine. Also, everyone gets the benefit of this like weird laptop that for this year only, they put the camera at the bottom of the screen, which is nobody's most flattering angle. Like the lighting is bad. If I don't have the laptop super open, then it's like, let's just guess who designed this camera. Seriously? Like, what is that about? Nice.
I appreciate technological flaws.
Just trying to be real with y'all.
All right, so I'll go ahead and give our standard intro, and then I'll turn it over to Heather and you, Tiffany. And we are recording, just so you know, and we post this on our website. So anyway, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us at this month's WLEAD Speaker Series. So my name is Marie Honeycutt. I'm in Sales Ops at Alaska Communications, and this year's WLEAD Chair. If this is your first WLEAD event, then of course, welcome. And if not, welcome back. And so before we get started, just a little bit about WLEAD. WLEAD stands for Women in Leadership, Empowerment, and Diversity. This committee was formed about 6 years ago as champions of inclusivity and diversity. We're committed to that cause and the education and awareness around it, supporting professional growth of our employees and uniting our workforce and community. So we're thrilled to host the WLEAD Speaker Series each month, as it brings together members of our community, builds connections, and creates awareness on important topics. So to introduce our speaker today, we have Heather Rhodes.
Everybody, Heather Rhodes, marketing manager at Alaska Communications. And it's really my honor and privilege to get to introduce Tiffany. She is just a champion of change within the community. You know, if you LinkedIn, check out her LinkedIn, you're going to find, you know, some pretty phenomenal titles from executive director and state advocacy program managers, philanthropic officers, et cetera. But really, you know, what it's about is championing change within the community and bringing awareness into the community around some pretty prevalent issues that are happening. You know, I've seen her advocate and champion and win in legislation throughout the state, and really make some positive change. And that's something that, you know, from a financial impact, a community impact, and for a lot of homes, personal impact, is something that's really important on what she's doing with Recover Alaska. So I'm honored to call her friend, and I'm even more honored to get to introduce her to the WLEAD as this part of this month's WLEAD presentation. So from there, Tiffany, it's all you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Heather, for that lovely introduction, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks to all of you for having me. I'm super flattered. I'm calling in from Anchorage on Dena'ina land. I want to acknowledge the Dena'ina people. I feel lucky and grateful to have been born and raised here, and to get to continue to work here and live here and raise my family here. I am the executive director of Recover Alaska. We are an organization that works to reduce excessive alcohol use and harms across the state. We do that at the system level through advocacy and policy change, increasing access to care, leading statewide alcohol misuse prevention alliance, and social norms change. So reducing stigma and trying to celebrate recovery. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my journey. I'll tell you a little bit about alcohol, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. But then I would love to open it up for discussion and hear from you all. I really welcome the opportunity to keep learning and growing and also am happy if things come up as I'm talking and you don't want to wait till the end, please feel free to interrupt or raise a hand. I don't use Teams very often, so Heather, I'll ask you to help me monitor that in case I miss something, but I would love it to just be sort of conversational. We're all just humans here. So I was born and raised here in Anchorage. I went to Bartlett, graduated in 1999. I left to go to college when I was 18, and I stayed out for about 12 years. I graduated with a degree in classics, so everything about 2,000 years old and not super useful to getting a job, but I did learn how to think critically and communicate. I traveled the world a little bit. I traveled the country. I knocked doors for campaigns. I marched in pride parades. I played rugby for 10 years. And that was actually a very transformative life experience and really got to understand the benefit of teammates and being on a team and the value of teamwork and feeling really confident about having a solid place on a team. Rugby's a sport that really welcomes all body types and skill levels. And so long as you care and try, then it goes well. And I just feel like so many lessons I've learned from that sport have stayed with me throughout my life. I held jobs in the restaurant industry at almost every level of that particular industry. I had jobs in fundraising and volunteer recruitment, marketing and PR, philanthropy, and government affairs prior to my current role as executive director. I eventually also went to graduate school. I went to the University of Oregon and I got a master's in public administration and a graduate certificate in nonprofit management. I also worked through graduate school in a job called the Bias Response Team Graduate Teaching Fellow. And I sat on kind of every committee about equity and diversity that I could possibly get engaged with. I had cared about social justice prior to that, but I did a lot of learning in graduate school about it and kind of my role in that or what my role could be. And I continue to have to learn so much every day about my own privilege and how to use that power for good and how to acknowledge it and how to be quiet when it's time for me to be quiet and listen. And I still work at that all the time. And like I say that even though I'm about to talk to you for like half an hour, I don't know. So just to say that. And another aspect of my journey that's pretty monumental in terms of shaping kind of who I am and how I show up as a person and a family member and an employee and an employer I have substantial privilege. I was afforded every opportunity growing up. I have an adverse childhood experience score of 0. I was raised in a home with a lot of love, and I'm the youngest of 4 children, and my siblings are my best friends. And I always felt safe and secure and loved. And I started drinking when I was around 14, secretly without my parents knowing, and I developed an alcohol use disorder. And I began experiencing negative impacts from alcohol before I even left for college. And those continued to increase and worsen over the years for the next 14 years. It wasn't always terrible for sure, but whenever bad things happened, alcohol was always involved. And I mention the stuff about my childhood because it is very common for folks who have trauma, who have experienced trauma growing up. It is much more common for those folks to develop an alcohol use disorder, but also just to say like that it doesn't have to be like that. Alcohol can come for any of us. And so I just want to make sure that I really make that clear and represent that I will say I am part of the statistics about, if youth start drinking alcohol, at age 15 or younger, we are 5 times more likely to develop an alcohol use disorder than if we wait until we are 21 or older. So just to throw that out there, but I will get to more information about alcohol later. I am forever in debt to the free mental health services that were afforded to me when I was in graduate school. That is when I stopped drinking. My first day of graduate school was my first day of sobriety, and I am super proud and grateful to say that I am a person in long-term recovery from co-occurring alcohol use and anxiety disorders. And I've been sober since September 29th, 2009. I am especially grateful for that. Over the past year and a half, I was just at a conference earlier this week where they were sharing some numbers around alcohol use during the pandemic, and it has just skyrocketed. I know that we all kept hearing about the mandates that have to happen to keep bars and restaurants open, and I am fine with that. I support the market. I support people having jobs. And the alcohol industry recorded record growth in sales in the past year and a half, and they are making that money off of us, off of our anxiety and our fear and our stress. The population that was most impacted by that increase are women with children in the household, especially ages 0 to 5, but just astronomical increases across the board as people are dealing with their stress and they're at home, and we have more and more access to alcohol. That is just a very real thing. I was blown away by the numbers. Okay. I also want to say, like, a really, really important part of who I am recently is a mother. I had a daughter, Margaret, about 5 days before we went into hunker down last year. So she's coming up on a year and a half, and she's just the best. She's just the best thing in the entire world. Okay, so as I think about why I was maybe invited here, I have been thinking about my career path, and a couple of things have really made a difference for me over the years, I think, that got me to where I am. And one of those is mentorship, and like both informally and formal mentorship programs. And I think that you all also have a mentorship program, which is great. I was thrilled to hear that. I have had a couple of like very official mentors in my life, but I also have always strived to just reach out to people and talk to people and ask them about their journeys and how they got to where they are and how they figured out where they wanted to go and how they got doors open for them and all of that. My undergrad, I went to Pomona College, and one of the things that they did after you graduated is you could reach out and say, hey, I just moved to San Francisco. Can you tell me who the alumni are here? And so I reached out to some of those alumni who had jobs that sounded interesting to me and said, hey, we both went to the same school. Can I buy you a cup of coffee and just learn more about you? And I don't think I've ever been turned down for a request like that. And I have made a lot of them in my life. So I would just encourage folks to think about who, like looking around and seeing who you admire and who has a leadership style that you like, or who has a job that you really want, and ask them how they got it and ask them how you can get it next. I've just learned so much from people over the years doing that. Before my job at Recover Alaska, I worked at Providence. I was at the foundation for a few years, and I was looking into a mentorship program there, but they didn't really have one at the time. I think it was actually in between phases or something. So I just made it part of my professional development plan that once a month I met with different leaders. And I started with leaders internal to Providence, but then I looked out for leaders around the community. And I did that. And initially I sought out female leaders, especially in healthcare. There are fewer of them. There are fewer of us than there are of men. And so I wanted to hear about their specific journey and if they had specific advice for me. And I I still didn't exactly know what I wanted to do or which direction I wanted to go in. And so I was hoping that it could help steer me as well a little bit, which I think it did. And I also wanted them to know who I was. And I wanted them to know that I was a person who was hungry for growth and was looking to be pushed. And so then when I moved on from the foundation, when I was applying for the job in government affairs at Providence, one of the women that I had interviewed was on the executive interview committee for that job. And so, I mean, not only did she already know a little bit about me, but it also just gave me a lot more comfort sitting in that room where I felt like I wasn't sure I belonged or not. They really took a risk on me giving me that job. I had the educational background. I had taken some classes in policy analysis, but I had no experience doing government affairs or anything around policy. And so I was really grateful that she was there, and that a lot of the women who I kind of met along the way just encouraged me to go for things and to try things, even if I didn't feel fully prepared. And that's another thing that has kind of stuck out to me as I've been thinking about this conversation today, over the past couple of weeks. A thing that I know is true for myself, and that I have also seen pretty commonly in other women, especially who I work with, is that we just don't give ourselves the benefit of the doubt that often. And we have a greater tendency to undervalue ourselves and think that maybe we're not ready for a challenge than I have seen in men. And research that I have done also shows that men see us this way too, and that it's super common, like when looking at candidates for a position, when folks look at a resume for men, they look for potential and they look for skills that could lead to this new role. Whereas for women, they look for specific experience. And like, if you haven't done this before, how can we possibly know if you can do it now? Which is a real difference. And so as an employer, I find myself making sure that I try to check that and try to acknowledge that up front and stop doing that for anyone of any gender. And as a person and as a mentor, sometimes I really encourage folks to always look for our own potential and to make that case in an interview and say, even though I haven't done this before, I have done X, Y, and Z that are going to lead me into being able to do this. And I am 100% sure that I can do it. And here's why. And like, unfortunately, maybe we just have to make that case for ourselves for now, while the world continues to get better and better about our internal biases. And like, one really strong example of this is the job at Recover Alaska. Somebody sent me the posting the first time they tried to hire. They tried to hire 3 different times. The first time they tried, somebody sent it to me and I said, no, I'm not ready for that yet. I just got this job at Providence. Thank you for thinking of me, but no. And then they tried to hire again. This is a few months later, and somebody different sent it to me and said, oh, I think you should take a look at this job. And I said, that's really kind. I'm not ready for that. I'm not even gonna explore it. And I put it away. And then the third time they tried to hire and a third different person sent it to me, I thought, okay, maybe I should at least like look into this. And so I did what I always do. And I reached out to the person who currently had the job. And I asked if I could take her out to tea just to talk a little bit more about the organization. And so that's how I kind of went into that meeting, wanting to learn more about the position. And I told her a little bit about myself, and I wanted to learn kind of what sorts of things she thought I should be doing to someday get a job like that, or to someday work for Recover Alaska. And this is Alicia Townsbane, if you know her. then you can agree with me how wonderful she is. And if you don't know her, you should offer to take her out for tea. She's phenomenal. And she just really strongly encouraged me to apply. And again, like she even followed up by email and said, I really think you should do this. And I asked her when it was due, and she said tomorrow. And so it was a quick turnaround, but I applied, and 5 interviews later, I had the job, even though I really didn't think I was ready for it. But turns out none of us are ever ready for like the next big step, depending on when we ask our brains that question, I guess. So all of this to say, I would just encourage you all to believe in yourselves. And even if you don't, to believe your friends when they tell you you are capable of a thing and you're ready for a thing and you should try for a thing. You know, when I got sober, I had to do a lot of work around learning how to love myself and learning how to be proud of myself and kind of acknowledge the positive things about myself, because it had been so long of not doing that and so long of really feeling a lot of shame and feeling less than and feeling worthless, honestly. And so one of the things that they say in the program that I use to get sober is, you know, like, we will love you until you can love yourselves. And I really took that to heart. And at first I rolled my eyes a lot, and there are so many cliches. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then a couple years in, I was like, oh, I get it now. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for loving me when I couldn't yet. And I think that that's a super valuable lesson, not just to people who are struggling with alcohol use or any substance use disorders or any disorders. I think it's just a really valuable lesson that we can often be our own biggest critic, and we believe our friends and our loved ones about other things. We should believe them about the positive things that we're hearing about ourselves. Or maybe you're not a person who struggles with that and you already know that you are amazing and wonderful and can change the world, because you all can. But in case you don't know that yet, trust the rest of us. I also want to just make sure that I call out that, like, I know that I am not doing everything right. I know I make a lot of mistakes. At Recover Alaska, we have tried over the past number of years to make sure that we focus on equity, and that especially in our external work, we've tried to really consider race, especially given some of the negative stereotypes that exist around race and alcohol, and trying to counteract some of those, or at least counterbalance some of those. And like, we have so much more to do. And so just in the past couple of years, we've started doing some very intentional equity work, both externally and internally, to see how we function as an organization, what processes are in place, what what might be limiting us in terms of our structure and our governance and our decision making. And like, again and again, every time we like turn the page, I just find more and more ways that I personally, and I as the leader of an organization, follow, the white dominant culture and systems of oppression, because that's how a lot of our country is built and where a lot of us are starting from. And so it takes a lot of work. I have to keep on doing that work I learned how to do getting sober, about not getting stuck in shame, and instead just kind of accepting where I am and trying to take the next best step forward, and admitting that I am wrong. And then even when I think I'm doing it right, when I get told that's also wrong, like, just trying to be open to that. And so I really work a lot on patience with myself, and on trying to, when I feel myself having a strong reaction to something somebody says or feeling defensive about it, I just try so hard, and I don't always succeed. I try to just be quiet, because I'm like, oh, if I'm having a strong reaction, usually in a couple days later, I discover that that's because they are right. And I don't like to be wrong. And so just always a work in process. And like, even with all that, Recover's staff, like we are currently 3 white women. And so unless and until we figure out how to center people of color, Indigenous people, our perspective will always be through that lens. And so we're really working on how to open that up and how to not make it an afterthought and how to not make race and ethnicity like something that we try to account for, like inviting voices in at the very beginning, and compensating them for their time to help us learn and understand how we can really serve everyone better. So those are the things that I have been thinking about in terms of me and myself and my journey. And so Heather, I would love for you now if you could share the slides, and I'm probably going to go through these fairly quickly, but we'll ask for them to be shared out so that you can have all of these numbers at your fingertips whenever you want them. But I'll just try to move quickly so that we can have some time for discussion and conversation. Next slide, please. Oh, I forgot I put this one in here. There's my family when I was telling you about who I am and where I come from. This is them. Okay, next slide, please. Alcohol is killing us. I am not a teetotaler. I don't think that nobody is allowed to drink ever. I just do think that it is important that people understand what they are putting into their bodies. And I think that big alcohol is very powerful and has hidden that from a lot of people for a very long time. So I'm just going to give you some facts with no judgment, a little bit of judgment about big alcohol. Alcohol is killing us. Alcohol is the 3rd leading preventable cause of death in the United States. An estimated 95,000 people die every year from alcohol-related crashes. Sorry, causes. I saw crashes on the screen. A lot of different causes, some of which are crashes. Next slide, please. These deaths have been steadily increasing over the past 20 years, up from roughly 36,000 in 1999. So 60,000 additional deaths in the past 20 years every year. Next slide, please. This is another place where equity matters and disparities really exist. Alaskans are dying at rates over twice as high as the national average. And when you consider Alaska Native people, they are dying at a rate nearly 10 times higher. That is not because alcohol is a part of their culture. I have a lot of thoughts about this. It's an entirely different presentation, but I think that colonization and white supremacy have a lot to do with some of those rates. I will also say that Alaska Native people have a far greater population who does not drink at all than, say, for example, white people do. So it is also not to say that all Alaska Native people drink and overdrink. It is to say that they experience greater harms when they drink. Another word about equity, suicide is the leading cause of death among Asian American young adults, and problem drinking is rapidly on the rise in this population, but they are the least likely to receive treatment and are seen as a low-risk group due to the myth of the model minority. LGBTQIA folks are overrepresented in alcohol use disorders, and it is no coincidence that big alcohol sponsors pride events across the board and have been for years. It is no coincidence that big alcohol tries to target minoritized populations. I'll move on. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of health impacts from alcohol. Many people know that alcohol is related to liver disease and to fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Many people don't know that alcohol is also related to heart disease, stroke, diabetes, mental health disorders, fertility issues, and it is a carcinogen. The estimated association with breast cancer is an approximate 30 to 50% increase in risk from having 1 to 2 drinks a day. 1 or 2 drinks a day, your increased risk for breast cancer is 30 to 50%. Drinking alcohol in moderation means 2 drinks or less in a day for men and 1 drink or less in a day for women. 7 drinks per week for women, 14 drinks per week for men. Drinking less is always going to be better for your health than drinking more. There is no level of consumption that improves your health. And anything that you hear otherwise has very likely been funded by big alcohol. There are also some adults who should not drink alcohol at all, such as people who are pregnant or me, other folks with alcohol use disorders. Next slide, please. Teens aged 12 to 20 drink 11% of the nation's alcohol. 65% of youth obtain alcohol from friends and family. The number one thing you can do as a parent or trusted adult to reduce underage drinking is to talk to your child about alcohol. Not once, not twice, make it part of the regular conversation. Don't tell them that they can't have it just because you said so. Tell them that young people can't drink because their brains are still developing until they are 25 years old, and alcohol and other substances can so easily rewire them. There is no evidence showing that allowing your children to drink alcohol in your home will make them less likely to binge drink at college. That is not a thing. There is research showing that the younger a person starts drinking, the more likely they are to develop a disorder. Next slide, please. 30% of American adults aged 18 and up don't drink at all. Another 30% consume, on average, less than 1 drink per week. The top 10% of drinkers are consuming 75% of our nation's alcohol, nearly 74 drinks each week. So if you work for the alcohol industry, please know that I'm not talking about you individually as a person. I am talking about the industry. But big alcohol knows this, and they thrive on this, and they need people to drink to excess in order to make the profits that they are seeing. When they throw on a tagline like drink responsibly, that's just them checking a box so that they can make the public feel better about what they're doing. They can't have people drinking responsibly or they'll go out of business. Next slide, please. This shows the increase in alcohol sales during the pandemic. I was hoping to pull together a cooler slide on this, but I just heard some of this information earlier this week about the alcohol increase, the consumption increase during the pandemic. Households, about a 33% increase here in Alaska of alcohol consumption during the pandemic due to stress of the pandemic. Really, really large increases among Black people or non-white, non-Hispanic males, women across the board, and as I mentioned, especially women with children in the household, especially younger children or men with teenagers, interestingly. It really is astounding. It's some of the most shocking numbers that I have heard in a long time. They are not out in print yet, so I can't share what all those numbers are because I just couldn't write them down fast enough. But if you're interested, let me know. I'll connect you later. Next slide, please. Excessive alcohol use is often or only talked about as an individual choice and a personal moral failing. This attitude stigmatizes the disease of addiction while also not beginning to address the systems of harm like poverty and lack of adequate housing and access to education, systems like white supremacy, patriarchy, colonization. Again, I could do a whole presentation just about my thoughts on that, but I just want to impress that solutions to combating big alcohol must be grounded in the same beliefs as the fight for equity. Fiery activism, relentless hope, and unyielding resistance. Next slide, please. Angela Davis says, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. The work of being an advocate for public health against big alcohol is so daunting. They are incredibly powerful. They have legislators in their pockets and people drinking up whatever they're putting down, quite literally. They have over 300 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., which is a lot. I do this work because of my personal experience, combined with my passion for social justice and my energy for advocacy. And we recently got a really hard-fought win. We passed a 5% alcohol sales tax here in Anchorage, which is one of the best public health policies to reduce death and disease related to alcohol. And it does not harm local businesses unless they're making all of their money off of selling to underage kids, because those are the ones primarily impacted by a tax. The money will go to prevention of child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence. It will go to homelessness and substance use disorder services, and it will go to a mental health crisis response team. I'm not encouraging you all to stop doing the work that you're doing and do what I do, but I do encourage you to find your best asset or your best skill set and to see if there's a way to combine it with something you care really deeply about. For me, that's what I need to do to personally sustain my energy. And I just think that when I see people who are able to do that, they just tend to have a lot of energy. I think it's the only way for all of us together to make long-term positive change. Next slide, please. Audre Lorde said, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." As I mentioned, the past couple of years, I've really tried to do more listening than speaking, which again is probably not obvious right now. And when I feel defensive, I really, really try, especially to be quiet and just sit with it and to be uncomfortable and to wait until I'm no longer heated to try to figure out why something irritated me. And then I try to figure out how to change it. And I ask for a lot of advice about that. And it's a slow process and I have to give myself a lot of grace, but I really think it is so worthwhile and just incredibly rewarding work. Next slide, please. And a lot of this work is really heavy. And at some point I realized that self-care is the most crucial and radical thing that I can do. And I would encourage all of you to really think about ways that you are taking care of yourselves. My most challenging advocacy work is when I fight for myself. But, you know, after about a year in this job, I was at a pretty risky place. I was skipping counseling. I wasn't working out. I wasn't sleeping enough. I was basically just surviving off of Beyonce and peanut butter M&Ms. And I had some big red flags and I reached out for help. And I made a number of requests to my board and they said yes. And they encouraged me to keep coming to them with ways that they could help me. And so I try really hard now to do the same for my staff and to my colleagues. I cannot emphasize enough how comforting and critical it is to be recognized as a full person and to be empowered to bring my whole authentic self to work. The tangible support that I am provided is absolutely the only reason that I've been able to remain in this role. This year in particular has been one of collective trauma for all of us. Reach out to each other, support each other, ask each other what's good, sit with people in the dark, have grace, allow extensions. If somebody comes to the office smelling of alcohol, don't fire them, help them, ask them what you can do to support them. Rewrite your policies to center the people who are showing up to do the work, not the system. As I said in the beginning, we're all just humans. This photo is from one of our youth-led mini grants. They did a respect walk through their village, asking the adults to say no to alcohol misuse, sorry. I'll read it. It says, you can close your eyes if you want to. Place your hand over your heart. Can you feel it? That is called purpose. You're alive for a reason, so don't ever give up. All of this has been a journey for me, and I'm still on it. I think we're all on a never-ending journey toward betterment. And I just want to reiterate my gratitude for inviting me here today. And I would love to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Tiffany, thank you so much. I think people are clapping, whether silently or with emoticons. So
I think we have a hand raised by Wendy.
Hi, yeah. First of all, a great talk. I love the idea that people can just sit with their uncomfort and work through it instead of reacting. That's really, really good words. One of your earlier slides showed that rural alcohol addictions, misuse are going up in both men and women. Would you just speak on that a little bit? I was just curious why you think that is.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I will say that is a national number. And so I did not like very specifically look into their definition of rural, but I would bet you that maybe even Anchorage classifies as rural nationally. Maybe not, but almost certainly the rest of Alaska. So I would just say that those are national definitions of rural and urban. But I think that we do have greater harms of alcohol in rural Alaska than in urban Alaska as well. I can't, so I mostly just want to say I don't know for sure that those exact trend lines are our trend lines here. But I think that there are a number of reasons for that. I think, we don't have nearly as much of the continuum of care available in places outside of our urban centers. There aren't really detox beds in most of Alaska besides Anchorage and Fairbanks. And that kind of just continues throughout every level of service that somebody might need, whether they need detox or inpatient treatment or intensive outpatient treatment. There just aren't as many of those services available the further out you get from an urban center. So I think that's one aspect. I also think that there is something to be said, in Alaska, rural coincides a lot with Alaska Native populations. And I really want to clarify that I don't think alcohol is an Alaska Native problem, but Alaska Native people do suffer greater harms, whether that is from their own personal drinking or from somebody else's drinking. And I also know, just really anecdotally, and I don't even want to mention the name of the hub, but one of our hub towns in Alaska, because I don't want to shine a negative light on anybody, and it's very easy for people to do that. But we have laws in Alaska about local option, about whether places can be damp or dry or wet, which is kind of the amount of alcohol that is allowed. That's not the case in Anchorage or Fairbanks, but in a lot of our smaller communities. And sometimes when a hub makes a decision and a lot of those outlying places maybe don't make that decision, then that dichotomy of having alcohol readily available or not having it allowed at all, I know sometimes creates for some issues, people going in and then having to drink all of the alcohol at once before they can go home, and then maybe not making it home because of that. I also think that Alaska is a really extreme place. If somebody if somebody passes out drunk on the sidewalk in San Diego, they're going to wake up the next morning maybe embarrassed, whereas here they might not wake up, depending on what time of year it is. Those are my first thoughts.
Thank you.
I have a question. Hi, Tiffany. My name's Heather. Thank you for being here today. This has been fascinating. You talked about how the pandemic was very beneficial for big alcohol, and you talked about who it impacted most. And I'm wondering what Recover Alaska is able to do to support those that are suffering on the other end of that.
Thanks so much. That's a great question. We had to, as everybody did, do a lot of pivoting when the pandemic started and move a lot of our in-person gatherings to online, just like everyone did. And so some of the things that we did already were trying to, build out a lot of virtual resources, because a lot of times when people are talking about addiction, they say that the solution isn't sobriety, the solution is connection and community. And that's one of the things that went away with the pandemic. And so, but a lot of groups and organizations did a lot of work to make virtual support readily available. And so we just really made sure to try to advertise that and gather all of those resources in one place and get those solutions to as many people as possible. We also, one of the ways that we do social norming work is through social marketing campaigns and trying to highlight the positive with a positive social framework. And so we did a couple different rounds of advertising, especially trying to target high risk folks, reminding them that they are not alone, reminding them that recovery is possible, reminding them that people are here to help. But I think it's a really good question with moving forward. I think it's two-part. I think one part will need to continue addressing this pandemic, which we all know is not over, and figuring out how to do that as people get really fatigued of being on internet all day. What are some other things we can do and encourage? And then the other part of that are all of the new populations that have sprung up in alcohol misuse and excessive use, and just needing to really center those populations as we consider solutions. So instead of maybe, well, I fall into one of those categories now because of my child at home who's very young, but really trying to, we will be working with folks in rural. As we see that rural death rates are increasing, we'll be working with Black folks as we see Black folks drinking has really increased in the past year, probably pandemic combined with a lot of the social justice work that has been brought to the forefront, and asking them what we can do and what the solutions are, and then us putting the energy and the funding behind that.
Got another hand up, Gordon.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I was wondering if maybe you could address two things. They're concerns that I'm aware of. One of them is the dangers of just stopping drinking if you're consuming at a certain level. And the other maybe you could talk about is post-acute withdrawal syndrome.
Thanks so much for the question, Gordon. I appreciate it. And I will also just say that I am not a provider, and so whatever I say is not expertise from a provider, and I encourage anyone to talk with a healthcare provider with these kinds of questions. And what I know from my work in the field is that you're right. For some folks who are physically dependent on alcohol, it may not be safe to quit cold turkey. And that is one of the differences. I really try not to pit alcohol against opioids or other substances, because one fight, all fight. I will say that that is one of the differences, that detoxing from alcohol when your body is very reliant on it can be fatal. Whereas with opioids, it's my understanding that it can be incredibly painful and uncomfortable, but won't kill you. So I would just encourage people, if/when they become ready to stop or reduce their drinking, to talk to a healthcare professional. And our detox beds are growing in the state, which is very positive, and there is more access to reimbursement from Medicaid around that. And so it's kind of a slow startup, but ideally, hopefully soon we'll have greater capacity in the state for that. I will also say online, there are a lot of different screening tools. recoveralaska.org, we have one. So it's not an official assessment, but it's a kind of a quick questionnaire about someone's drinking levels. And so you can put in how many drinks you're drinking, and it will tell you, like, this doesn't seem, you're in this moderate zone. I would encourage you to consider reducing your risk. Or like, this is this is a dangerous zone. We would really encourage you to reach out to a health professional. So things like that may also be helpful. And then your second question, I'm sorry, do you mind repeating it? Actually, I'm not sure that I have an answer for it, but tell me again.
What I had asked is if maybe you could talk about post-acute withdrawal syndrome.
Can you tell me more about what that means or looks like? I'm sorry, I can't tell you more about it right off the bat.
It's the long-term effect after going through acute withdrawal, where it can involve long-term depression and, other issues like that, brain fog and, lots, there's a lot of post-acute effects that can go on for months or years.
Sure. Thanks very much for that clarification. And again, like I'm not a provider, and so I am a bit out of depth here. I'll just say that across the board, what we see are that the most positive results in terms of recovery or sobriety or trying to reduce or quit substance use is that the best results come when the issue is looked at holistically and maybe not just, going to detox or just even going to inpatient treatment, but also considering all of the mental and emotional and spiritual health things that may be going on and potentially seeking outside help for that, or at least finding a peer group or peer support around that, so that not only can the physical piece be treated by healthcare professionals, but all of the emotional parts can also be treated. And I echo and agree that some of those physical things can take a really long time to clear out of the body. I feel like one number I've heard is that 5 years is maybe one of the magic numbers where kind of a return to use is far less likely than before that. And I'll just say that return to use is also a really common part of people's stories, and that depending on how severe the issue is, it might take a person up to 7 times before they can get and stay sober. And so just for folks listening, whether it's you or a loved one or someone it can feel really exciting when somebody decides to make that change and get help. And then it can feel really discouraging if they return to use. And I would encourage everyone to keep compassion around that. It's, I think we've all probably started a diet or a new workout regimen that we miss a day or two, and it's not like we've lost all the work we've put in. It's just another step on the road. And so I would just encourage everyone to try to stay compassionate. I hope that answered your question a little bit.
Thank you. I actually had asked the question somewhat for the benefit of the others.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. We got one more question from Haley.
Hi. So my name is Haley Youngman. I do have a couple of questions here, kind of like twofold, but the first part of my question is, how does Alaska compare to the rest of the U.S. in regard to available recovery resources? Like, do we line up with other states? Are we struggling to serve the people in need? And do we have any statistics on this?
I should have that number. My counterpart, somebody I work with often in Oregon, he is so good at saying, this is where Oregon ranks on this, and this is where Oregon ranks on this, and I don't have those numbers. I know that whenever I talk to folks in other states, they like audibly jaw drop when I tell them how few beds we have for detox, and how long our waiting lists are. I don't know exactly where we rank, but I would make a very strong assumption that we are in the lower half for how many treatment resources. And that's kind of specific inpatient institutionalized treatment. I think we do have a decent amount of peer support and cultural supports that exist that we probably could do a better job of talking about, but I think we're pretty low on the treatment beds.
Okay. And then one other question was, what resources in your perspective, do we lack today that you would like to see available to Alaskans? Like, what would be the most impactful in your opinion, like near term and long term?
I think workforce. I think a huge thing I've been hearing again and again from providers is workforce. Like, we just don't have enough people who are willing to maybe not who are willing and or have the right education and experience and or the right opportunity to join the behavioral health care workforce. So there's a lot of turnover, and even if/when we do have funding, we just don't have people to fill those. And that includes mental health counseling, that includes more specific addiction work. And so I think workforce is a really huge one. And yeah, I think that's the biggest one. If I can only choose one, that's the one. And also, I'm so sorry to do this, but I have a meeting at 1 o'clock that I really cannot be late for.
That's actually what I was going to mention. We appreciate your time, Tiffany. I know that we don't want you to miss that audience. That was a big one to get in front of, and so greatly appreciate your time here. And if you do have any additional questions, shoot them over to me and I can get them to Tiffany, and we can work together to answer them. And we'll definitely have this one recorded and posted.
Thank you so much. And please share, feel free to share those slides, and feel free to share my contact information, Heather, with everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. I just wish I got to be in a room with you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany.